This is our new office, and this is the new Mac Mini. It is unbelievably small, and also unbelievably affordable at just $599. And from the early benchmarks, we already know that this $600 machine can outperform an M3 Pro MacBook Pro that retailed for $2,400. That is ridiculous. So we were thinking, how would this base M4 Mac Mini handle gaming? Obviously, you wouldn't get us to game on it, but if you're getting it for home or office use, and you want to game on the side, how does it compare to some other Macs? Well, we've tested everything, from native games to popular Windows games running through Crossover, as well as Nintendo Switch, PS2, and PS3 games all emulated. And the results are very surprising. So let's start off with a couple of native games. These are really your best bet if you're looking for the best possible gaming performance on this new M4 Mac Mini, as not only do the games take full advantage of the power of Apple Silicon, but they also utilize features such as Metal FX, which, just like Nvidia's DLSS, upscales the game from a low resolution to a much higher one, whilst keeping a stable frame rate. The first game that we tested was No Man's Sky, and for all of our tests, we actually disabled Metal FX, as we wanted to see the raw performance from each machine without relying on any upscaling techniques. And at a 1080p resolution and all the settings set to high, the M4 Mac Mini managed to get an incredible 90.6 FPS average frame rate. And keep in mind that this is on the base $599 model. And with an over 90 FPS frame rate, the game felt and looked incredible, with enough headroom to bump the resolution and settings even higher, and that's before we even touch on Metal FX. And what's even more impressive is just how this base M4 model performs compared to the other Macs. The M3 MacBook Air, for example, Apple's cheapest MacBook that costs $1,100, so you can almost buy two M4 Mac Minis for the price of one MacBook Air. That one only got 33.3 FPS on average, albeit it is mostly due to its passive cooling. And when compared to the M2 and M1 Macs that did have a fan inside, the M4 Mac Mini got almost double the frame rate. The base M4 Pro Mac Mini scored 112.6 FPS. Not a massive difference compared to the M4 model, but this does put it above even the M3 Max that has 30 GPU cores as opposed to just 16 on the M4 Pro Mac Mini. But what impressed me the most was that the M4 Mac Mini scored just 14 frames per second less than the M1 Max MacBook Pro. This is incredible, especially if you're upgrading from an M1 Mac. The next native game that we tested was Resident Evil 4. This one was far more demanding, so once again, at a 1080p resolution with all the settings set to high and Metal FX disabled, the M4 Mac Mini significantly outperformed the M3, M2, and M1 machines, with literally double the score of the M1 MacBook Pro. And keep in mind that you can always enable Metal FX to easily bring that frame rate up to 60 or even more. The M4 Pro Mac Mini was even more impressive, getting 84.6 frames per second, or 64% more than the base M4 model, with just 6 more GPU cores. That was again higher than all the other machines, including the M3 Max MacBook Pro. The only weird exception being the M1 Max, which for some reason scored quite a bit higher than the rest here. The final native game that we tested was Stranding, and here, the M4 Mac Mini was able to run it at an incredibly smooth 68 frames per second. Again in 1080p with Metal FX off. Compared to the M3, M2, and M1 machines, this is a massive performance increase, more than double the performance of the M1 MacBook Pro. The M4 Pro chip then pushes the frame rate to 105.8, 44% higher than the M3 MacBook Pro, and beating every single machine from our tests except for the M3 Max. It even outperformed the M1 Max MacBook Pro with half the GPU cores. Like, even the base M4 model was able to hold its own against the M2 Pro and M3 Pro machines. Which means that you've got tons of headroom to play in 1440p or even 4K if you enable Metal FX, something that I was not expecting from a tiny $599 computer. So let's turn it up a notch and try some popular Windows games that will run through Crossover. But before that, if you're planning on buying one of these new M4 Macs, I highly recommend using a tool that ensures it always runs at peak performance. Ever since my 2011 13-inch MacBook Pro, I've relied on Clean My Mac, and they've just launched their biggest update yet. Now simply called Clean My Mac, the first thing you'll notice is the stunning new UI, which is even cleaner and aligns with their Clean My Phone app design. But it's more than just a new look. Cleanup now removes 27% more junk, whilst also being easier to find duplicates and similar photos to delete. Smart Scan has been upgraded to Smart Care, offering more, including removing duplicate downloads and updating apps. But my favorite new feature is the Assistant, which shows my MacBook's health with a sleek icon that actually matches my model. Declutter and optimize your Mac with Clean My Mac, and also get a free 7-day trial by using the link below. Okay, now back to the Windows games through crossover. When you run games through crossover, you do lose a ton of performance, as you're running them through multiple translation layers, such as Rosetta for crossover itself, then Wine that translates Windows API calls into OS X, as well as further layers for Vulkan or DirectX. First, we've got Cyberpunk, which, by the way, is launching natively on Apple Silicon next year. Until then, we've got the crossover version, which ran at 28.8 frames per second on the M4 model, at a 1080p resolution, high settings, and dynamic resolution disabled, which is not too bad. But if you think 29 FPS is bad, well, the M3 Air got 13.8. The M2 Mac Mini got 4, while the M1 MacBook Pro got 4.3. Yes, Cyberpunk is unplayable at those settings on those previous generation machines. When we switch to the M4 Pro model, the frame rate increases massively to 47.4, which was more than all the other machines, including the M3 Max. My guess is that this is because Cyberpunk is more CPU heavy, and the M4 Pro has the most powerful CPU out of all machines that we've tested. So it performed the best despite its GPU being weaker than the M3 Max's. We then tested the popular Hogwarts Legacy, and with the same settings as before, 1080p, high with dynamic resolution off, the M4 Mac Mini got 22.4 frames per second, so not quite at an unplayable state yet, although this was considerably higher than the M3, M2, and M1 machines. The M4 Pro, on the other hand, performed far better, with close to 3 times the frame rate at 58.6 and higher than all the other Macs, aside from the M3 Max. So it seems like Hogwarts Legacy does need a more beefy GPU, which is where the M3 Max came in. And just as a reminder, this is the base M4 Pro Mac Mini. The unbinned M4 Pro version that has 2 extra CPU cores and 4 extra GPU cores should be very close, if not even exceed, the M3 Max here. We've also tried Spiderman Remastered, which we were able to play at a 32.6 frame rate on the base M4 Mac Mini. Again, 1080p, high settings, and dynamic resolution / FSR disabled. And it actually felt pretty great swinging through New York City at this frame rate and with these graphical settings. And like I said, if you really want to get a 60 FPS experience, you actually can by just tweaking some of the settings. The M3 MacBook Air was also able to play Spider-Man, although at a much lower 13.4 frame rate, while the M1 and M2 machines just could not load the game at all, probably due to only having 8 GB of RAM. When we tried the M4 Pro Mac Mini, I was honestly shocked, as it was able to get very close to a stable 60 FPS experience, beating even the M3 Max once again. And lastly, we tried Diablo 4, which is actually my most played game right now, and the M4 Mac Mini was able to basically get 30 FPS on average, which is pretty good. The M3, M2, and M1 devices did struggle quite heavily, with the M1 MacBook Pro only getting 3 FPS on average. Yeah, the game was basically unplayable, at least at those settings. The M4 Pro Mac Mini surprised me once again, as it was able to get 73.6 frames per second on average, almost 2.5 times more than the base model, which is something that I was just not expecting at all here, and only 10 frames per second behind the M3 Max. So if you're a Diablo player like me, I'm happy to say that both the M4 Mac Mini models can handle it easily. Even more so when it comes to the M4 Pro. Oh, and by the way, if you've got a studio display as well, our 8K wallpapers, like our new Space Stations pack by our new designer Ali, will look simply stunning. Same goes for our Wild Whispers pack by Cheese, a beautiful wildlife pack that comes in a variety of vibrant colors. And of course, since they're all in 8K, you can zoom in even further and reframe them to your liking without any loss in quality. Check out our app Wallpapers for free by using the links below. And now it's time for our final test: emulating console games, a task that is very CPU heavy. We started off with some Switch games, Mario Kart 8. We ran this in 4K, and by the way, there were no graphic options to adjust here. And as we can see from the results, the M4 Mac Mini got very close to the 60 FPS cap, getting 51.6 frames per second on average, considerably higher than the other base devices. The M4 Pro got 59, however, this time the M1 Max and the M3 Max both outperformed the M4 Pro, getting a solid 60 FPS experience. We then tried Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, and yes, I know, it is absolutely crazy that you can literally play the latest Switch games on your Mac, and in 4K. Yeah, Tears of the Kingdom looked absolutely incredible. However, its performance was not that great. Here are all the results, and as you can see, only the M3 Max was able to reach that 30 FPS cap. The M4 Pro got close to 26, while the M4 got about 20. I'm quite surprised that the M2 Pro Mac Mini got a higher score than the M4 Pro. And this is something that you'll see again in these console-emulated games. Some results will be quite weird, as none of them are optimized to take full advantage of the onboard resources. For example, in Pokemon Legend Arceus, both the M3 Max and M1 Max were able to reach the 30 FPS target. The M4 Pro got very close, while the M4 was just 1 frames per second behind. We then played some PS2 emulated games in 4K. We started with God of War 2, a game that I actually never played. My first God of War, by the way, was God of War 3 on the PS3. And it was really cool to see the original God of War 2 run in 4K and on a Mac. And here, all machines performed incredibly well. Most were able to reach the 60 FPS cap, the only big exceptions being the M1 MacBook Pro and the M3 MacBook Air, which of course was the only one passively cooled. We then tried Simpsons Hit Run, and this is where the results were the weirdest. The M1 scored higher than the M4, while the M3 Max scored lower than almost all the other Macs. The reason being this very spiky performance of the game. We played each game, by the way, for a fixed amount of time, and then took the frame rate readings at set intervals. And in this case, the readings were just all over the place. That's why some of these emulated games are a bit of a hit and miss. A GTA San Andreas, on the other hand, performed very well, being able to sustain a 30 FPS frame rate, which was also the cap, on almost all these Macs. Yes, I know, the new Remastered edition is out, which just got a big update last week, by the way, with some major fixes. But if you guys just want to play the original, even an M1 MacBook Pro will be able to handle this very well. So what about PS3 emulation, which is far more demanding? Well, here, we only ran the games at 1080p resolution, starting off with Little Big Planet. I do remember playing this loads on my PS3, by the way. And good news, almost all Macs got a stable 30 FPS experience once again. The only exception being the passively cooled MacBook Air, which did throttle. We then tested Skate 3, which interesting enough did not have any frame rate cap. And once again, we did see some strange results here. The base M4 Mac Mini outperformed the M4 Pro and almost all the other models, except for the M3 Max. Once again, showing us that more raw performance doesn't always translate to a better frame rate in some of these console emulated games. And lastly, we tested Ratchet and Clank Tools of Destruction. And here, both M4 models performed extremely well. None were able to reach the 60 FPS cap, but both M4 Mac Minis managed to get over 40. The only other machines that were able to reach 40 were the M3 Max MacBook Pro and, surprisingly, the M2 Pro Mac Mini. But okay, having tested 16 games, is the M4 Mac Mini the ultimate gaming machine for $600? Well, the answer is no. As even though you cannot build a more powerful gaming PC for $600, you can buy a PS5 Slim for $500. But the important thing to remember is that the Mac Mini is a fully fledged computer, not just a console. And for $600, it was able to achieve a very decent performance in pretty much all the games that we've tested. And this is why it's so special. Like 90 frames per second in No Man's Sky without us even enabling metal effects, that's just incredible. And sure, whilst the native games catalog is still quite limited, I do expect this to grow, as we are getting games like Assassin's Creed Shadows and Cyberpunk natively pretty soon. So if you buy this as a computer and then you want a game on the side, you're actually going to get a very good experience in both native games as well as Windows and emulated console games. And keep in mind that we tested all of these games on high settings and with metal effects disabled, which if you do enable and then you also lower the graphics, you will be able to get a fluid 60 FPS experience in pretty much all the native and Windows games that we've tested here. As for the M4 Pro model, yes, it does cost more than double. And while in some games you do get double performance, in most games you really don't. So the base model is definitely the best value for your money. However, what really surprised me with the M4 Pro version was just how close it got to the M3 Max level of performance, sometimes even exceeding it, despite this being the base M4 Pro chip with almost half the GPU cores of the M3 Max and also with 12GB less RAM. So if you're looking for an amazing home computer that can handle anything, including games, whilst being crazy small and very affordable, there's never been a better choice than the M4 Mac Mini. But what do you guys think? And stay tuned for more videos. I'm Daniel, this is ZONEofTECH, and I'll see you guys in the next one. ZONEofTECH, signing out. Cheers.